Okay, can everyone see my screen? Right. So welcome back, everyone, to Passion to Action. So we're going to start off. Do we want to start with the icebreaker right away? Do we want to get everyone in there right now? I think I want to do the whole welcome for everyone first. So Dawn, do you want to start us off with with our land acknowledgement?
For sure. And so again, I want to acknowledge where everybody's calling in from. So feel free to add into the chat the traditional territories that you're living on or working on right now. And as we are calling in from, many of us are calling in from Toronto, I just wanted to share this land acknowledgement to start us all off in a good way. And so I want to ask all of you to take a few deep breaths. So to breathe in with your nose and out with your mouth. And just to do that a few times so that you can center yourself. I'm sure a lot of you have had busy days and lots to think about, but now we're just starting a new circle of knowledge, a new place to share. And I wanted to get us into another good mindset as well to get started. And with that, I wanted to say that Toronto is on the traditional territory of Haudenosaunee speaking nations, including the Wendat, Peyton, Seneca, and Mohawk, and more recently joined by the Mississaugas of the Credit. This territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement that's nearly 1,000 years old, but the most recent one was signed in 1685 in Cataraqui between the Haudenosaunee, or Six Nations, and the Anishinaabe, or Ojibwe, and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the lands and relationships around the Great Lakes. And what that means is that as other nations came through Haudenosaunee territories, they agreed to put down their sharp implements by the fire and agreed to be peaceful as they came through our lands to visit family or to hunt or for other purposes like trading. And what this means for us is that by living and working here, we all have a responsibility to the environment and to each other to only take as much as we need and to leave enough for everyone else for the future generations, while we all treat each other with peace and friendship and respect. And so let us enter into this space together in a good way with good minds and learn some good stuff tonight as we share with each other. Now I'll go a big thank you.
Thanks, Dawn. All right. So today we are going to be talking about public narrative. So I'm really glad that Dawn took us through that whole centering activity, because this can be a pretty heavy one. This is going to be asking you to be vulnerable and go out on a limb and share some parts of yourself that maybe you haven't shared before. So we can keep that in mind, that centering and those nice deep breaths as we're going through all of this together. So we're going to talk about public narratives. I'm going to teach you about what that is. We're going to do a bit of a case study on it. So we're going to show you an example of a public narrative and talk a bit about it, break it down. We're going to do a fishbowl, which is basically just ICL terms for a role play, a demonstration. So we're going to show you my story, actually, and in the coaching process that we go through. We'll do a body break, and then we'll go into breakout groups where you'll share your own stories. Then we'll come back to the large group. We might have a couple of volunteers share their story if we have time at the end. I very much hope we do, because that's, I think, our favorite part of the whole thing, is being able to hear everyone's stories. And then we'll go through the same thing we did last week, a summary of our learnings and a bit of an overview on our next session. So before we get into that, I'm going to take us back to our icebreaker. So Amber is going to pop us out into some breakout groups, and you're going to tell your name, where you're joining from, because you're going to be talking to different people than you did last week, hopefully, so you can reintroduce yourself and let us know what your superpower is. And that can be like a real thing, or it can be what you want your imaginary superpower to be. Like, I would totally fly. Absolutely. I think that suits my personality perfectly, and I would like to be able to fly. So it can be a real one, or it can be an imagined one, whatever you feel comfortable with. So Amrit, you want to pop us out into group?
Yep, opening them now.
Thank you. Okay, I believe this is all of us. Bear with me and I'll reshare my screen. Okay. So we are going to be learning about public narratives today. Public narrative is the story of self, us, and now. We really like quotes at ICL, so I'm going to give you a quick one here. The purpose of the storyteller is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comforted. So what we mean by that, or the way that we choose to interpret that, because I'm not Elizabeth Ellis, so I can't tell you if this is exactly what they meant, but the way we understand this is that the purpose of the stories we tell are to bring together our community and our constituency, for us to offer support and comfort to one another, and to make the people who are maybe a little bit too comfortable, make them a little bit more uncomfortable, to force them to listen to our stories and put them in a position where they have to listen to what we have to say, even if that's a bit uncomfortable for them. So it should be comforting to the community. It should bring us together. It should be helpful and supportive, and also serve our cause of making the people in power a little bit uncomfortable so that they can understand the issues that the community is facing and the urgency for why those issues need to be addressed. Another quote, because I told you we really like them here. Stories can conquer fear, you know. They can make the heart bigger. I like that one a lot. And we did talk about this last week. It's the thing that we want you to keep in mind as we're moving through this entire organizing journey. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? When I am for myself alone, what am I? And if not now, then when? So let's start off by having a conversation. Why do we tell stories? Why are stories important? Stories are something that are common across many cultures. Lots of them include storytelling. So why are they important? Why do we tell them? If you want to go ahead and put anything in the chat, open up your mic, tell us what you think. Why do we tell stories? Why are they important? They make me feel, yes. To find a connection, to bring people together. Oh, another one, to create connections. Yes, absolutely. Hearing people's story, it helps find common ground, right? You find connection, brings people together. It helps to humanize an idea. Love it, yes. It's easy to dismiss statistics and numbers, but it's much harder to dismiss a person who's telling their story. To grow empathy, yes.
I think stories are about like pretty much everything. Like we don't have, I think it was an Indigenous author who said, Leslie Silko, who said, if you don't have the stories, you don't have anything. And they're how we navigate the world. Our creation myths and all of our stories that we talk about in how a family works is a story. It's all story. And the kind of story we tell, whether it's a bootstrap society or a communal society, transforms the way that we interact with each other, who has power, who doesn't. I think stories really are at the root of everything. And if you can tell a good story, you can change the heart and mind and community.
Absolutely. I like what you said in there too, that stories help shape the way we understand the world and help shape the way we move through the world. So yeah, stories are very powerful. We can use our stories to be able to organize the world in a way that is more equitable for everyone. Absolutely. These are all really important points. Love these. To help show that the status quo is broken, bring awareness, give new perspective. Absolutely. These are fantastic. So if we were to sum it up, we also think that stories teach something. So stories can teach morals, values, lessons, and how to make choices. So a lot of this was included very much in the things that everyone was saying. Morals, you know, being able to, well, you tell me, what kind of morals did we have in here? I'm scrolling back through everyone's status here, humanizing ideas, creating connections. You know, these are all things that people value, and values as well. Community, empathy, humanizing people, connecting with others. These are all values. These are all things that are really important, and they're things that we can communicate through stories. lessons as well. Alexa, you talked a bit about creation myths, and this is how we pass down ideas and knowledge to different generations. So absolutely, this can be a way to pass down lessons. And how to make choices. That one I think is going to come up a little bit more as we're talking about how to share your story, because we're going to talk very deliberately about choices and how they're included in your story, and how we can ask others to make a choice too. What makes a story memorable? So I'm going to have to exit full screen mode because we're going to ask you all to help us contribute to this slide. And in order to see the typing, we need to go out of that mode. So what makes a story memorable? We know that there are lots of stories here. We've all heard stories. Thinking too about the stories that really stand out to you. What made them memorable? What was it about them? And you can stick in the chat or you can go ahead and open up your mic.
Think about your favorite movie or your favorite book and something that you really remember.
And it says elicited emotion. Yes, absolutely. Spoke of a deep, abiding truth. Oh, can you tell me what you mean by that, Alexa? Spoke of a deep, abiding truth?
Well, I just mean that sometimes the story itself might not be true, in that it might be a made-up story about a group of elephants, but there's something in the story that resonates with our being at a deep level, and oh yeah, that's the truth about being human. That's the truth about living this in a life together. There's a deeper truth that gets at it. Emily Dickinson said, "Tell the truth, but tell it slant," by which she meant through poetry, stories, music, we can gets under our skin and tells a truth in a different way that a head-on kind of didactic truth sometimes does. So
it's a really interesting way to teach morals too. The one that stands out to me is Aesop's Fables, right? And I think that's one that many people are familiar with, and it tells a story that has a moral within it, in a way that's really engaging for the audience too. Can relate to it, provokes empathy. The characters, yeah, these are all really important things for what makes a story really memorable. Anything else? I think we've got some really good ones here.
Maybe if we can just throw it open. So provoking empathy, what about a story provokes that response of empathy?
I think talking about emotions that are challenging or powerful, and that I felt myself. So kind of appealing to universal human emotions, basic human emotions.
One example is I loved seeing Wicked because nobody had ever had empathy for the Wicked Witch before. But when you see the story told from a different perspective, it helped you to understand things and actually feel for that character, which was shocking.
It goes back to that point on why we tell stories. It helps humanize people, right? You know, you can hear from the other side of the story. When you hear Dorothy's side of the story, the Wicked Witch is just an evil person. But when you hear the Wicked Witch's story, it humanizes her. It makes you understand, have empathy, gain new knowledge, have some morals where you care about other people, even when they're green and maybe they don't look so pretty. A good structure to a story. Yes, absolutely. You can have the best moral, the best values, the best lesson, but it needs to be told in a really coherent way, right? That's why it's important to hear stories from multiple perspectives. History told by the victor, absolutely. And I think that's a really great point to bring up when we're talking about how our stories can be used to help, forward a cause that we're working on. Because if the people in power are not telling the same story as you, then it takes a lot to be able to tell your story, to get it out there, and to have your point heard too. So we don't want history to just be told by the victor. We don't want our present to be told just by the people who are in power. So that's why we tell our stories. That's why we work with people who have lived experience to be able to share their stories. Awesome. Okay. So how do stories move us to action? Because we've talked a lot about now why we tell stories, what makes a story really memorable, but how do you use your story to move people to action? Has anyone experienced that, heard a story before and felt really motivated to do something because of that story? Yeah, I see some head nods. So the way we understand that is that the role of stories and storytelling in organizing is it's part of the heart, right? So last week we talked a lot about the head. We talked about the journey of the organizer. We talked about the different structure. Later in this series, we're going to talk about things like strategies and tactics. All of that is the head. Those are the things that we think about. There are our ideas. The heart is your story. The story is why people would care about what cause it is you're trying to advance. It's what is going to inspire empathy. It's what's going to get people on your side. It's what's going to motivate them to want to do something to help you. And once we have both of those together, you have your story, you've told it to people, you have a strategy on how to use that story very effectively, and that's what's going to lead to action. Because one without the other, you're not going to get super far. But when we put both of them together, the heart and the head, that's what's going to move people to action. So stories help us feel the emotions that remind us of our values. So this is just a reminder on how we're stringing all of this together. So we want to elicit those emotions in people when we're telling our stories. And that's what's going to remind them of their values. It's very hard for people to counter that emotion. So I mean, for example, I can tell you all kinds of statistics on how many youth are homeless in Toronto, or how many youth are on the streets every night. I can tell you all kinds of facts and statistics about that. And I mean, I used to be a shelter worker, so I could list off a bunch of those, but I'm not going to bore us with that right now. I could tell you all of those things, but that's not necessarily going to motivate people to action. What I could do instead is tell some very specific stories about the things that I witnessed within shelters that remind people that, oh, I don't actually want children to be sleeping on the streets. I don't actually want children to be subjected to these awful things that are happening. I don't feel right knowing that there are children out there who are suffering every night. And that's what's going to remind people that this is a value they have, that we should be protecting children. And so that's going to help move them to action. But just the facts and statistics aren't necessarily enough to do that. We have to elicit that emotion and get that empathy from people before we can expect them to take a lot of action on this. It would be nice if we could just tell people the facts and they would do something about it. That's what people do with a lot of awareness campaigns. They want to get it out there, say, look, here's the facts, and hope that people will do something. But we know that stories are incredibly important for this step of the process. We need to elicit that emotion and that empathy before we can move people to action. Leadership in uncertain times. We want to move people from stagnation to motivation. So right now, especially in terms of housing, honestly, I mean, I feel like it's been stuck in limbo for a very long time. It's pretty stagnant right now. And we want to move people to motivation so they can take action. So we're moving from inertia to a sense of urgency. Like I said, when things have been stagnant for a while, they're kind of just become comfortable with the status quo. So we want to create a sense of urgency that make people aware that this is something that needs action right now. We want to move them from apathy to anger. Often we frame anger as this really negative emotion, but anger is not necessarily a negative thing. Anger can be a very righteous thing that moves people to say, this is not okay, and I'm really angry about it, so I'm motivated to now do something about it. Anger can be very powerful. We want them to move from fear to having hope. People become kind of paralyzed when they're afraid. So we want them to have a sense of hope in order to feel like they're able to make a difference so they can take action. We want to move them from isolation to a sense of solidarity. It's very difficult to even consider taking on a very large problem if you feel like you're very isolated. So we want to move people into communities and constituencies so they feel a sense of solidarity with others so they can take action. We want to move from a sense of self-doubt to feeling like you can make a difference. You know, that's something that comes up very often too. What can I do about this? I'm no one, I'm nothing. Well, of course you are. You can make a difference. Your story is very powerful. You have a lot to offer, and we want to bring you to a sense that you can make a difference. I see a question in the chat. How can you tell a story without feeling like you're capitalizing on someone's trauma or pain? That is a very good question. And this is why when we're talking about a public narrative, it tends to be your own personal public narrative. So I could, you know, going back to my example of the shelter workers story, I could tell you the stories of the youth there. I could, you know, capitalize on their pain and suffering. I could tell you about all the awful things that they go through. But I'm not necessarily going to do that in my public narrative. Instead, I'm going to talk about my perspective on it and how I felt witnessing these things. I'm not going to just regurgitate someone else's trauma. I'm not going to it's actually dehumanizing when you talk about someone else's pain and use it to further some sort of cause, especially if you don't have their permission. So that's why when we talk about our public narratives, you're telling your own story. And a little bit further on in this session as well, we're going to talk about how to tell the right story, the story that's going to feel best for you when you're telling it. It's not that it's right or wrong. There isn't a wrong story. It's your story and it's your individual story. But we want you to tell a story that's going to feel good for you and that's going to create a sense of solidarity and community, not one that's asking you to just bear open wounds and cause yourself more pain and suffering. So yes, that is a very good story, a very good question that had a very long answer. It's a lot about balance. And we will talk about that a lot more. So keep that question in mind. And if this specifically comes up for anyone else as we're going through this lesson, please bring it up again, because housing is, it can be a very sensitive topic and it can be a very difficult topic for many people. So this is an ongoing conversation that we will need to have. So someone did mention as well, what makes a story memorable is having structure. It has to be told in a coherent way that makes sense. It has to be relevant. It has to have a point. So the way we do that is with this kind of complicated looking chart, but I promise it is simpler than it seems. So we want you to structure your story in a way where you talk about a challenge that happened in your life. And keeping in mind, this is not a biography. We're only going to be giving you about 3 minutes to tell your story. And so you're not going to be able to talk about every single thing that's happened in your life. We're going to have to pick one specific challenge that's representative of the things that you've gone through. So you're going to talk about your challenge. And from there, you make a choice. And sometimes this choice isn't super obvious on the surface, but everyone makes a choice at some point in their life. So you're going to talk about your challenge, you're going to talk about your choice and what happened because of that. For some people, there isn't a pretty neat outcome that you can tie up in a bow, but that's okay. Your story can be ongoing as well. So the basic structure is you had a challenge, you made a choice, and something happened because of that. And throughout the whole thing, you want to imbue your story with morals and values. You want to communicate that throughout your story because, as we've said, creating a sense of empathy, creating a sense of connection and community, we can do that through talking about our values. So we want that to be kind of consistent throughout your story. So a challenge, a choice, an outcome, and your values and morals throughout it. So your story of self, because that is what we're talking about today. Your public narrative is a story about yourself that you're telling. we want to talk about what called you to leadership, what prompts you to lead, and why should you follow me? So you don't have to like answer those questions, but it's something to keep in mind throughout your story. You don't have to specifically say you should follow me because, but it should be inspiring a sense of why you should listen to my story. So leadership is not a performance. It's not something we do to others, but it's a relationship that we form with others. I think that did come up in the last session as well, where we talked about how leadership and understanding leadership is perhaps different than what we've imagined before. Leadership isn't dictating to others what to do. It can be, but that's not a very effective style of leadership, especially when you're trying to get people on your side and you're trying to motivate them to do something. We're not trying to force them, we're trying to motivate them. So it's not a performance, it's not something you do, it's not something you tell others to do, it's a relationship that you've formed with others to help motivate them and inspire them and help move them forward. So your call to leadership is your story of self. Your story of us is going to be the shared values and shared experiences, and the community is connected between those. So today, we're only going to be talking about the story of self, but keeping in mind that later we're going to be trying to move people to action. So your story of us, we'll talk about in later sessions, but it's important to keep in mind, especially because we're all here for a specific purpose, which is talking about housing and equity related to housing. So we want to keep that in mind as we're building this community. So you don't have to have your story involve housing specifically, especially as we're practicing this, but it would be very helpful if your story is talking about something related to that so that we can capitalize on that shared value and community that we're creating here. And from there, we'll talk about the story of now. And that's what you're asking people to do. That's the sense of urgency and the motivating people to action that we want to create. So today we'll talk about the story of self. In the next session, we're going to talk about creating the community and asking them to do something specific for us. So the self invites others to be in a relationship with you by telling your story, by sharing your values, by connecting with others through the process of storytelling. You're inviting them into a relationship. The us is inviting others to join the community. When you know that you have shared values and shared resources, that's when you can come together. And then the now is inviting others to take action, to do something. So we're going to watch a video on this. So keep in mind, the story is not about housing, but the idea is that it's going to show you the structure of how we put stories together. It's going to illustrate how this can be done and how we can create a sense of empathy and shared community. So it doesn't have to do with housing, but it is a very, very powerful story. I will give a bit of a trigger warning for this story, though. Our friend Mung here, he lived in a war zone, and he talks about the consequences of living in a war zone, which was experiencing quite a lot of violence. So that is something to keep in mind as we start this video. If that's something that you don't feel like you can listen to, that is totally okay. You don't have to subject yourself to that if that's something that's not comfortable for you. The video, I believe, is about 5 minutes. So if you want to mute it for that time, or if you need to take a break, grab a glass of water, absolutely do whatever you need to do. But I'm going to hit play on this. And I did click the option to share sound, so this should work.
It was an afternoon on a bright sunny day. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out, and a village man shouted, "Run, run, military is coming." I was only 7. I ran to my parents, and who were following a long line of villagers fleeing into jungle. We climbed up and down the hills, stopping only to catch our breath. Then I looked back. I saw our entire village is burning in flames. I kept asking, why? someone is burning down our homes, and why no one in the world is helping us. I didn't know it then. Our tribe was the target of a brutal military campaign. I was born in a nomadic mountain tribe in the remote villages of Chittagong Hill Tracts near the border of Bangladesh and Burma. When I was 9, I witnessed my own uncle gunned down by the military. When I was trembling in fear, my mother pulled us aside to the corner and said, "I must get out of this hell." When I asked how, she said, education was the only way out. I do not know what education meant to you when you were 9, but for me, education meant I won't end up shot dead like my uncle. Education enabled me to get admission in the University of Hawaii in the US. And because of that, I was able to flee war zone and receive political asylum in the US. Education is my passport to life. In 2005, I went back home to see my ailing mother. It was humiliating to see our villagers are working as a day laborer for the people who stole their homes and their lands. I also met a little boy, Ongsi, 7 years old, aloof, shy, and homeless. Think of what you are doing at 7, coloring pictures in your classroom or playing in your backyards. For Ongsi, both of his parents are shot dead. Instead of carrying books, he carried bricks. Instead of playing house, he cleans house for 35 cents a day. I saw scars in his face, and I imagine the scars in his heart. This is injustice. I had a second chance in life. Ongsi deserves one too. So I used my entire life saving of $63,000 and opened a school for elementary school for orphan children. Now, you may not have experienced atrocities like Ongsi, but I think we all know how it feels like to be powerless at times when all odds are stacked against us. In those darkest hours, someone, somewhere opened our eyes and gave us glimpses of hope. From our class, I remember Mary from the Divinity School, Saved from the Life in the Street, or Oscar from the Harvard Kennedy School, a mentor helped him to break the cycle from the gang-infested neighborhood. Through education, we can open eyes, give hope, and save life for children like Ongsi too. Today, Ongsi is in the 5th grade in our school, and he dreams to be a teacher someday. But after 5th grade, he has nowhere to go. I used my entire life saving to build the elementary school. So I urge you to join me to build a secondary school. For Ongsi, the time is now. We cannot wait, and Ongsi cannot wait. We need to raise $10,000 to build classrooms. Between Harvard Kennedy School and Graduate School of Education combined, we have 1,600 students. And we only need to donate $7 each to build that school. 2 Harvard schools can come together to build one school for orphan children. Imagine what a powerful message it sends to the world. This is not a charity. What we do here today is empowering people to serve their communities for generations to come. If you believe, as I do, a child doesn't have to grow up in the same darkness as he or she was born, or it is better to light a candle than to curse darkness, I urge you to join me on November 11 at Elliott Lyman Room, Graduate School of Education, to organize a fundraising event. If our Harvard education is meant to help those who are afflicted by injustice, raise voice for those who has no voice, let us be true to that cause. Let us free these children from the shackle of child labor. And let us send a message of hope to Ongsi that he is not alone. He matters. We believe in him. We support him. And he can indeed be a teacher someday and serve his communities. Thank you very much.
Okay, so what are some of the challenges facing Hmong in his story? You can either open your mic or put it into the chat. What are some of the challenges in his narrative? Joanna says war, poverty.
Well, his life is in danger.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Displacement.
Yep. There's more than one answer to this. In some of the narratives, there's only one, there's one answer, but he has more than one. So what choices then does he make? Oh, wait, we've got another one from Francesca. Challenge, trauma of seeing his family member killed. Yeah, absolutely. And then starts us off with the choice to pursue education. And Alexa says that too, to get out through education. Anyone else want to add to choices? Yeah, so this takes us to multiple layers, but to moves us through, he wants to donate his life savings. That once he gets the first layer of his education, he wants to donate his life savings to build to this school. And then he realizes that first school isn't enough, and he wants to help others through building another school. Any other outcomes seen? To call other people to his cause. That's right. So in his narrative, he's telling his own story, but then he's inviting other people to join him as well too. That's great. Do you want to go to the next one? Next slide.
I think they got them all.
Yeah, they did great. So what's the core value in Mung's story? So think about values now. What's important to Mung? And to his mom? And to him? Survival? Absolutely. And Joanna, passing what on to the next generation?
Maybe opportunity, like trying to break the cycle somehow, the opportunity for education.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And Jen says, ensuring that others are empowered through connection and education. And Alexa says, peace, empowerment, children having childhood without fear, poverty and war, and education. And Tegan says, a right to education for all. Yeah, I think we got it there in all of those. That was a lot, and they're all right. The key point in all of that, like the key thread weaving through all of that, is moving from injustice to freedom to hope for others as well too. Do you want to jump in there, Melanie, or do you want me to continue?
Yeah, I can pick it back up.
Okay.
So what Mung did here was creating a collective us, weaving together individual stories to create a collective us. So he talked about himself, he talked about Aung San, and he also talked about others within the Harvard Kennedy School. He talked about how they were supposed to be there to address injustice. And he took their stories and their understanding and their shared values and weave them together to create a collective us. This is something that matters to all of us, whether you're a child living in a war zone or some people who are attending the Harvard Kennedy School. There's a common value of education here. And he did a really nice job of weaving those together to create a sense of us among people who might not have believed they have anything in common before. So he did a really good job of that. So how did he capture the imagination of the us? What values did he talk about? How did he bring that into his story? Are there any ideas?
And he went so far as bringing us directly into his story.
Mhm. Yeah, I think he did a really great job of painting a picture. Yes, Anna says vividness. Took them to their childhood. Absolutely. Yeah, he asked you to imagine what were you doing when you were 7 years old? Because he was living in a war zone, and Aung is living in a war zone. Shared values across the group. Yes, absolutely.
And Jen also added family and a sense of place and peace.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. He talked a lot about family and his mother's values and how he was passing that on. So in his story, these shared values, these things he did to connect us all together, he asked, why is it that no one is helping us? What education meant to you when you were 9? Because for him, education means life. Think about what you were doing when you were 7, coloring books and playing in the backyard, contrasted with not carrying books and not playing house. So he did a really good job of making this very vivid, of painting a picture, of taking you back into your childhood and using your imagination. And then using that to inspire you to action. You got to do these wonderful things in your childhood. Let's make sure that Aung and all these other kids can do the same by providing them an opportunity for education. So Mung's story showed us what it is like to feel powerless and have someone to give us hope. He even called out specific names in the story too. We wanted to highlight that a bit. Now, he was able to do this because he knew his audience, and these were his classmates, right? He knew who these people were. And that's a really great strategy if you want to really bring people into your story. If you know who they are, pointing them out in the audience and being able to actually share that with them. And he talked about through education, you open eyes and you give hope.
And Jen was able to contrast that, like by saying the people, his neighbors were being forced, like the kids were being forced to work for the same folks who stole their land and homes, which is very unjust and makes me angry and makes me want to donate so that I can help to change that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, really great. It brings us back to that sense of urgency and using that feeling of anger to inspire and motivate people to want to do something about this. Which brings us very much to understanding the story of now, because that's what Mung was bringing into the end of that story. He made a direct call to action. He said that if everyone at the Harvard Kennedy School donated $7, we would be able to build a secondary school. That is very clear. It talks about the challenges that the community he's talking about and the community as a whole that he's created by telling his story is facing right now. We all have the shared values that children should be able to receive an education and that we should address injustice. We can do that by everyone donating $7 so that we can open up a secondary school. So he did an excellent job of bringing in that story of now, making that very, very clear. And what is the strategic choice that we're asking others to make? For Mung, it was talking about bringing everyone together to be able to take collective action to make a difference. So he wasn't saying, we should get the government to fund this, although that would be very nice. It really should be the responsibility of governments to provide education for all. But that's not a very strategic choice in this way. We know that when a country is war zone, when these things are happening, when this injustice is present, that's probably not going to be very realistic. So he's asking them to make a strategic choice. If all of us come together and address this as a community, this is the way we're going to be able to achieve action. And he painted the picture of a hopeful outcome. This is what's going to happen if we're able to build a school. His example of Aung San and being able to talk about what would happen for him, he was able to go to elementary school and he had these wonderful things happen to him because that school was built. That can happen again if we are to build the secondary school as well. So he painted a really wonderful picture of what that would look like. And we talked about quite a bit of this. Yeah, Tegan, you have something to add?
I just want to highlight also that although like we brought up a lot of shared values that we found with Mon, but I think it was very strategic of him to pay a lot of attention to the audience that he was speaking to and really emphasize on the right to education, because he was like he said that higher education, like this is our value and now our value is being attacked. So I think that's a very important strategy to think about the people that you talk to, because as Melanie said, we may have a lot of stories in our life and sometimes it's hard to choose the story to tell. So think about the people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is a very strategic way to understand how to move people to action, for sure. And it also, I think, Tegan, what you were illustrating there really well too, was way back at the very first quote that we said at the beginning, stories are meant to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comforted. We can probably assume that most of the people in the classroom that he was speaking to, if they're in Harvard, probably have a fair amount of privilege. So he spoke directly to them and created a bit of discomfort. You believe that education is important, right? You believe that addressing injustice is important, right? Here's how you can do it. So he spoke very, very well to his audience, and did a good job of doing all these things. So he used imagery to create a sense of urgency. What's going to happen to Aung Se? He's going to be graduating elementary school pretty soon. He needs a secondary school right now. This isn't something that can wait. The anger, it's not okay for children to be carrying bricks instead of carrying books. And hope, Aung Se wants to become a teacher and pass down all of this new knowledge to the next generation. He wants to, perpetuate those values that we're talking about. And solidarity, we can all come together with just $7 each and we can make a difference. So we're going to move on to, like I said, the fishbowl activity. And I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for this one. So what we're going to do next then is I'm going to tell my story, my public narrative, and then Dawn is going to walk us through how we do some of the coaching. So this is what you can expect to happen when you go into your breakout groups after our break. You're going to tell your story the same way I am now, and then you're going to receive some coaching from your group facilitator. Keep in mind, your story does not have to sound like mine. I have been telling my story for about 4 years now, and we're going to give you a very short amount of time to write your story. So it doesn't have to sound like mine. Although if it does, or if it even sounds better, great, I'm super excited to hear it. So I'll jump into it and I'll tell my story. Again, I'm going to give a quick trigger warning at the beginning. I do talk about homelessness. I touch briefly on drug addiction and also domestic violence. So like Hmong, education has always been really important to me. It's something that was consistent in my life. My grandfather was a teacher, and he always encouraged me to do my best at school. And I was very good at it. As a elementary school kid, I had straight A's. I was great. I was teacher's pet. I used to get in trouble sometimes because I was reading too many books at the back of the room, and I finished my math homework too quickly and would disturb the other kids. So education is something I really enjoyed. It was something that was very important to me. For my stepfather, not so much. He didn't see the value in education. It wasn't something that was central to his life. And he really didn't understand me and why I was so fixated on education, to the point where sometimes I would forget to do other things. It got to a point where I was about 8 years old and I forgot to feed the dogs. One morning we had 2 dogs and I forgot to feed them. It was my job. And he came to me and he said, "Why are you so smart at school and so fucking stupid at home?" And 8-year-old me was like, well, I don't know. Why am I so fucking stupid? And I proceeded to spend about the next 8 years trying to figure out why I was so fucking stupid so that I could fix it. And I tried real hard. I did so well in school. I participated in extracurricular activities. I did my best to be like the best I could be. And again, I did very well. I ended up becoming a black belt in Taekwondo. That was my chosen sport. And I was so good that I ended up going to a world championship and I won. I was literally gold medalist, recognized as the best in the world in my division. And when I came home, I went, this is it. This is going to be the moment where they tell me that they're proud of me. And instead, they took a look, my stepfather and my mother, they looked at my medal and went, oh, is that all you got? I thought it'd be a trophy. And I was like, well, I mean, that's it, man. I don't think there's anything that I'm going to be able to do that's going to make these people happy. So that night, I put all of my clothes into a couple of duffel bags and I walked downstairs and I told my parents I'm leaving now and I'm not coming back. And that's exactly what I did. And it sucked. It was not great. I couldn't go to school anymore because at that point I didn't have anywhere to go. I was 16 years old. Who's going to give an apartment to a 16-year-old? And even if they did, I wouldn't have been able to afford to pay for it with my part-time job at the grocery store. So I was living on the street in January, and it was a very cold January. So that's what I did. And a lot of really awful things happened while I was there. Pretty much everything you can think about that might happen to a 16-year-old girl living on the street did happen. I ended up in quite an abusive relationship, just to get to a point where I had someone to live with. And I dropped out of school. Because how are you supposed to go to school when you're living on the street or when you're being beaten up by a partner? It just wasn't going to happen. So I dropped out until I made the choice to go back. And I don't even know what exactly it was that made me feel like I wanted to go back. But one September, I decided, I'd go and register for school. There was another one down the street from where I was living at the time. I did have an apartment by then. I was 17 when I had gotten the apartment. And I had somewhere to live at that point. So I decided to go back to school. And it was really hard because I had to work full time in order to be able to afford that apartment. And I didn't think I was going to graduate high school, but I did. I did anyways, with the help of a very wonderful guidance counselor who made all my teachers pass me anyways, even though I absolutely did not meet the standards for attendance because I had to work full time. So I graduated. And that same guidance counselor told me, you should really attend college. And I wasn't going to, but she sat down with me and she applied to college for me. She made sure that I did it. So I applied, I graduated college. And then I wasn't done. So I went on and I got my undergraduate degree in social work. And then I still had more that I wanted to do. So I went back and I got a master's degree in social work. And then for quite a few years after that, for about, I think 7 years, I worked in organizations that helped children and youth who were experiencing homelessness or other difficulties in their life. And I was able to help them get an education the same way that I did. One of the things that I did was I helped administer a scholarship fund to youth who would not be able to afford to go to school otherwise. So that's what I did. And if we were getting a little bit of extra time, I also have a wonderful call to action, but we'll save that for another day because today we're just doing the story itself.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing your story, Melanie. We're so honored. Can I get a round of applause for Melanie, please? Oh my goodness. We're very honored that you shared that with us today. So I wanted to do some coaching now. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have one question for you. What was inside you as a young person that made you not want to accept the status quo and say, the street is going to be better than this place?
Yeah. Well, at that time, I couldn't think of anything that was much worse than where I was, because I never felt like I was going to be able to be my own person and grow into what I wanted to be if I had to live with people who were actively telling me that what I was doing was not good enough, even when I was doing my absolute best. So I figured it couldn't be much worse. At least when I was on my own, I'd be able to make choices for myself. I'd have the power to make my own decisions. even though those decisions sometimes weren't very great, at least I was the one that got to make them.
And looking back on your life, were there other people in your youth? Now I want to talk about your guidance counselor, but other than that, were there other people in your life that did encourage you throughout your childhood?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. My grandfather was a really big one. Like I said, he was a teacher, and education was very important to him. He taught me a lot of things that still can randomly just recall years later. Like every once in a while, my partner will see a bird in a tree and be like, "Oh, that's an interesting looking bird. I know what that bird is because my grandfather taught me that." Which is just random knowledge that just keeps coming up over the years. But yeah, he was very encouraging, and very tangibly encouraging too. The only way I was able to go to school after living on the street was because he set up an education fund for me.
That's amazing. That's really amazing. And the fact that you can remember that's knowledge that's been passed down. So that's really amazing, actually. How does that make you feel when you can recall information like that?
It feels like a connection to him, because he died about 10 years ago now. So it's nice to still have that feeling of connection and a feeling of belonging, and a feeling of love too, knowing that I got this from him and then I'm able to continue passing it on.
Yeah. And so when we get to that guidance counselor, how did you get to the point of like reconnecting with that guidance counselor? Like, can you think of the day or the moment that you started a stronger relationship with the guidance counselor?
I can, absolutely. Because when I say that I dropped out of school, I didn't actually drop out. I was expelled. I was kicked out officially for truancy, but there were lots of reasons. So when I ended up going to this new school and I was called down to the guidance counselor's office, I assumed they were kicking me out again. I was assuming that they told me that they were going to tell me that, you've been truant too often, you need to leave, you're not welcome here. And then instead, when I got down to her office, she said, "You are not in class very often. What's going on? Why aren't you there?" And I told her, I was like, "Well, I have to work." And she said, "Well, what's more important, work or school?" And I was like, "Well, I'll be homeless if I don't work. So I guess work." And she went, "Well, let me help you then." And she ended up setting me up with bus tickets. She got me food, and she spoke to all of my teachers and said, "Don't fail her just because she's absent. Give her a chance to turn in her work."
Oh, that's amazing. And so what impact did that have on you emotionally?
It made me feel like I had a support system again, that I had someone that I could rely on, someone that I could trust, and someone I could go to. And I did go to her quite a bit over the next year until I graduated. A
And do
year.
you think, oh yeah. And do you think that had any impact on the career, like what you chose to take in university, or did that come from someplace else?
I think that was a really big impact, because that was one of the conversations we had when she forced me to apply for college. She's like, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I don't know. I've got a job at Tim Hortons. I'll just stay there." She's like, "You will not. What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I guess if I had to pick, I'd want to help kids like me." And she went, "Great. Let's find those programs for you then." And so that's how she helped me to pick that program, and encouraged me to keep on going.
Great. And so knowing all the firsthand experience that you have as someone who's lived on the street, somebody who's lived precariously, somebody who's lived with all the experiences that you've had, as well as been working in that system, uh, what would the world look like if people had all the support that they needed? What would that look like to you?
I think the world would be a much stronger place. I think there's probably a lot of kids who are like me out there who have a lot to give, who have a lot of talents, and who have a lot of knowledge and a lot of things that they could be sharing with the world, who just aren't able to do that because they don't have the knowledge and the resources to be able to do that. Because that's something I'd like to talk about, and I address quite a bit when I tell my story, is that no kid should have to do what I did, because I got through it mostly on my own. I never received government assistance. I didn't ask for a lot of help, and no one should have to do that. the world would be much better if we were able to extend a helping hand to all of those kids so that they can become part of the community too. They have a lot to offer. So the world would be a better place if they had the ability to be a part of it.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing. And again, another round of applause for Melanie for sharing her story and elaborating on those pieces. Thank you.
So I will pop up my screen again. So in a minute, I'm going to ask you to start writing your own story. And we're talking about the right story. Like I said, there's no wrong story, but the right story is the one that's going to feel the best to you. So the right story, it should connect you to your cause. Mine in particular was talking about housing and education. That's very clearly in my story. It should evoke some kind of emotion. We talked about how that's a really important part of storytelling. So there should be some emotion attached to it. And it should describe a pivotal moment. So Mung had a very clear pivotal moment, where he got his education and where he decided to build the school back in his hometown. My pivotal moment was when I decided to go back to school. So then you could argue that it was also when I decided to leave home. So then it should describe a pivotal moment. What the right story does not have to have is it doesn't have to prove your credibility. Your story is your story. You are the expert in your life, and you don't have to prove that to us. So you don't have to give details that you're not comfortable with or that don't feel good to you in order to prove that you have some sort of authority on the subject. So, I mean, I talked in my story. There were a few things that I could have talked about a lot more in order to prove my credibility. I could have talked a whole lot more about what the experience was like of being homeless. I could have talked a lot more about what the process was like of getting into an apartment so that I could prove my credibility and that I had some sort of expert knowledge about housing related issues. But I didn't, because that doesn't feel right for my story. I only have 3 minutes to tell it. And so I didn't want to spend my time on it. And I don't have to do that. It also shouldn't overwhelm you. So I'm able to tell my story because I'm quite a ways past all of that. It was more than a decade ago. I've been through lots of trauma therapy to be able to understand and deal with the emotional consequences of what I went through. If you're not there, then you don't have to tell a story that's going to be overwhelming to you. And there are also parts of my story that I don't talk about because I would find that very overwhelming. I don't talk about the addictions issues because that doesn't feel right to me. And I don't talk a whole lot about the violence that I experienced because that to me, and this goes back to what Mel was talking about right at the very beginning when they asked about, how do we tell stories without capitalizing on other people's trauma and pain? For me, that would feel very much like having to put my trauma out there in order for people to, I don't know, do something for me. And I don't like that. That doesn't feel good to me. And so I'm not going to tell that part of my story, and that's okay. It also doesn't have to represent all of the moments. So there were a whole lot of moments that I could have told in my story, but these are the ones that I chose. And like we said, it's not a biography. You're not going to be able to tell your whole life story in the amount of time that we give you. So you just pick one, maybe two moments to be able to really tell your story. So that's what we really want to talk about here. Your story is yours. You can tell it in the way that feels best to you. And you don't have to prove any sort of credibility. You don't have to bear any wounds that haven't healed yet. You can tell the story that feels the best to you. And sometimes that's not always obvious. Sometimes you might get into a story and then realize, oh no, that was way too much. And if that's the case, would like to bring you back to what Dawn did at the very beginning when she took us through some deep breathing and some centering and do a little bit of self-care and reach out for some support if you need it. So I think that takes us into the sweet spot. So we don't want a super safe and boring story. I could have told a story just about education. I could have left it at, education was important to me. I was a teacher's pet, and then I wasn't able to make it through high school. But then I did, and I went back. that's boring. That's not really going to move people to action. And we don't want it to be super overwhelming either. So like I said, there are parts of my story that I leave out. But we do want it to be in the middle. We want it to be compelling. We want it to be interesting and something that's going to connect to others. So we are going to ask you to spend about 3 minutes writing your story. I know that is not nearly enough time, but we are going to take you through the coaching process, and this is not going to be the only time you tell your story in the sessions that we have together. So it's okay if it's not perfect. So we just want you to work through these kind of steps. What is the single key defining moment of your story? Who would you want to join you in organizing for change, and why act now? These are some things to keep in mind. So 3 minutes for writing your story, and then I believe we're going to do a 5-minute body break. Yeah. So 3 minutes for your story, and then 5 minutes for a break, and then we will see you back here. So I believe that's 7:21. Yeah.
So one question from my group, Jen just told a great story, but also Francesca didn't get a chance to tell her story.
Oh,
So-
well, would Francesca like to tell her story here and receive some coaching?
No
I
pressure.
would love another week to work on it.
But Jen, typically we do share stories with the larger, like 1 or 2 people will share with the larger group. And your story was very well done, but you just told it. Would you be willing to share it with the rest of the group?
Sure, I just don't know if I could tell it exactly the way I told it with you guys, but I'll do my best.
It's never, storytelling is an art, so it's never exactly the same twice, I find.
Hi, everyone. So I told a story about rural life as a gay person. Let's put it that way. So back in 2010, I had just finished organizing a union in my workplace, and I was in the housing sector, and it was a pretty burnout position that I was in. I was very burnt out. I wasn't doing well. I was quite unhealthy. So I needed to take a leave of absence from work. And in that time, I had, with my partner, Susie, we had this little place out in Bancroft, Ontario. And there was always a little bit of this idealistic dream I had to sort of utilize the space into creative space for community and marginalized artists and that kind of thing. And let's kind of vamp up Bancroft a little bit and do something really cool and creative with recycled art and home decor. So I was taking a leap of faith, and I know it was idealistic, but I needed to do it to feed my spirit and to make sure that I was coming back to good health again. And so we decided to move up there for a little while. And during that time, I was so full of enthusiasm and just so determined to make this work and to try and take a break from social services and organizing and activism. And, you know, we knew it was a little difficult in Bancroft, living as queers and living in a kind of a reactionary town that was highly conservative, but we thought we could manage it until one day in the middle, you know, after being open for less than a year, my partner came in to the house and told me that she had just been refused service at a restaurant in town because she's genderqueer. So I became furious because that's my go-to. That's what I do. I'm like, something bad happened. There's an injustice. This is not okay. I need to do something about it. So we decided to mobilize our resources in Toronto, which are other queer activists, as well as some of their networks in Bancroft. and the surrounding area. And we said, what can we do about this? So the answer was to have a big gay picnic and in the park directly across from the restaurant. So we called it a big gay picnic because we knew we wouldn't be able to have a march, and we wanted it to be a picnic. And we wanted it to be fun and funny and welcoming and warm and community oriented rather than an angry response or a protest. And what ended up happening, it became a national story. The mayor felt some pressure to attend, so she had to attend. And then what also ended up happening is there was some youth that had been living in Bancroft their whole life. They had experiences of bullying and ostracization because of their transgenderness and queerness. And they had an opportunity to speak at the picnic about their stories and about what it meant to them to be able to have a big gay picnic and be public. And it was pretty powerful listening to them. I actually cried. I was telling Dawn in her questions. And then what happened was, after some of the insane controversy, because it was very, actually quite vitriolic controversy that we faced up there. There is, to this day, still a big pride that happens for Bancroft and Maynooth. It's big. So about 150 people showed up that day. There was even a church involved who wanted to do a parent support group and that kind of stuff around LGBTIQ parent group, like a PFLAG version. And Maynooth has, about 5 years ago, started doing their own downtown Maynooth Pride March and celebration, which is quite well attended, and they don't get death threats. So that's a massive change. And yeah, it's still going on to this day.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. And what a great story of hope too, because obviously this is a terrible thing that your partner experienced, but hearing the way the community came together and how that change has been enduring is a very hopeful story. So thank you for sharing that.
Welcome.
So I know we are at 8 o'clock. So if anyone has to drop off, absolutely go ahead. We're not gonna hold you hostage. But if you're able to stay for a couple extra minutes, we would like to do the same thing we did last week, which is just to ask you a couple of very quick questions about what was your key learning from this training. What was the thing that stood out to you as being the most important? And you can go ahead and put it in the chat. You can open up your mic, whatever feels most comfortable for you.
I was reminded again of the importance of the specific ask.
Yes, absolutely. You need to have something very specific in mind that you want people to do. Anything else stand out? Francesca says, identifying my own story that brings me to this work as a way of inspiring others to take action. Amazing. Yes. Thanks for being here, Claire. Right. Let's move on to the second piece then, which is the rosebud and the thorn. What was something that really worked, something that had potential but needs to be improved upon, or something that needs to change for the next session? And we'd really like to hear about all three of these because we've got 4 more sessions together. So if there's something that's not working, please let us know so that we can change it. Formula, having it flow and be concise. Rose, hearing examples of engaging stories and getting to think about my own. Good. I'm glad that you enjoyed those stories. Anything else? Any buds or thorns?
I appreciated the opportunity to practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It would be very hard to just stick you in front of an audience and expect you to be able to do this without any practice. Is the purpose of coaching to improve one story? I mean, improve is part of it. Yes, yes. We do want to improve the structure to be able to help you get your message across very clearly and very concisely. But it's more than that. It's about helping you deepen your understanding of your story, about being able to connect with the emotions and your audience more.
And also for me as an audience member to deepen my understanding and connection with you as well.
Yes, because it's about that relationship, right? So the coaching is also a relationship that you're forming. Great. Continue putting stuff in the chat if you want to put in anything else. I'm just going to give you a quick update that our next session, we're going to be talking about recruitment. So we'll be talking about, now that you have your story, you have your thing that you want people to do, your call to action, how are we going to recruit people, get them on your side, so that you're not trying to do this all alone? Because a lot of advocacy work, I mean, pretty much all advocacy work, you can't do it on your own. You would burn out very, very quickly. So how can we recruit some people, get them on your side? When we would do coaching with others in our team, is that the idea? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's about that relationship for sure.
Building relationships and getting to know each other more deeply.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that is everything. Thank you all for being here and sticking around 4 minutes late. And we will see you all again next week.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Night, thank you.